White House now pushing back against the first indictments from special counsel Bob Mueller. They're saying the charges have nothing to do with the Trump team or the president, and that they still show no evidence of collusion with Russia. They said a bit more as well. On a Halloween, this is our costume today. I mean, this is what we get, right, Smitty?
Where's the orange? I mean, come on.
I kind of felt like Halloween was on Saturday.
I'll carry the orange.
I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning at home. How are you?
Good morning to you, Bill. Live in America's Newsroom, I'm Sandra Smith, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his associate Rick Gates, both pleading not guilty to 12 charges, including conspiracy against the United States. They are both due back in court later this week. The president's team putting on a united front as the charges became public.
President Donald Trump was correct. There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort and the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government. Those activities ended in 2014, over 2 years before Mr. Manafort served in the Trump campaign.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity. The real collusion scandal, as we've said several times before, has everything to do with the Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS, and Russia.
All of the activities, as I understand it, that they were indicted for was long before they ever met Donald Trump. The reaction of the administration is let the legal justice system work. Everyone's innocent until presumed innocent, and we'll see where it goes.
So meanwhile, former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos has already pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russia and is now said to be cooperating with the special counsel's investigation.
James Rosen is live in Washington. James, we are now learning the identity of one of the key figures in that AIDS indictment. So who is it?
Yes, good morning, Sandra. In the summary of events that George Papadopoulos signed as part of his guilty plea, the special counsel's team described the various foreign nationals with whom the young foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign made contact in the spring of 2016. One of them was a professor who was said to have promised Papadopoulos that he would introduce him in turn to Russians with well-placed contacts inside the Kremlin. Those contacts led Papadopoulos to try to facilitate a meeting between the Russian government and then candidate Donald Trump, an effort that was explicitly rebuffed by the Trump campaign when a senior official on it, believed to be Paul Manafort, asked that it be conveyed that, quote, DT, meaning Donald Trump, is not doing these trips. Now, according to the government's summary Papadopoulos signed, quote, the professor told defendant Papadopoulos, as defendant Papadopoulos later described to the FBI, that, quote, they, the Russians, have dirt on her. The Russians had emails of Clinton. They have thousands of email. Now the Telegraph newspaper in London has identified the professor in question as Joseph Mifsud, who's affiliated with Stirling University in Scotland, and according to the Washington Post, the London Academy of Diplomacy. In an interview with the Telegraph newspaper in London, Mifsud rejected the government's account of his role. The article states, and I quote, Professor Mifsud told the Telegraph he was upset by the claims about being privy to dirt on Hillary Clinton because they were, quote, incredible. He also described as a laughingstock a suggestion in the report that he had introduced Papadopoulos to a female Russian national described as a relative of President Vladimir Putin. And the unsealed documents indicate that Papadopoulos is cooperating with the special counsel's office, having been arrested at Dulles Airport this summer and having entered his guilty plea on October 5. Typically, sentencing is deferred and ultimately conditioned on the degree of assistance that the state's witness provides to the special counsel's investigation.
But James, Mueller's investigation goes beyond these three people, right?
Oh, well beyond, and really stretches across party lines. The Democratic head of one of Washington's most prominent powerhouse lobbying firms announced yesterday his resignation from the firm that carries his name. Tony Podesta told employees of the Podesta Group at a firm-wide meeting yesterday that he intends to fight the focus on him by the special counsel's team without dragging his firm into that. It was reported last week that Podesta, who is the brother of Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman last year, John Podesta, has come under scrutiny by the special counsel's office for his work with Paul Manafort's firm. It's worth noting, of course, that neither Podesta has been charged with any kind of crime as of yet. Sandra.
James Rosen, thank you.
President Trump tweeting a bit on this a bit earlier today. Quote, the fake news is working overtime, as Paul Manafort's lawyer said. There was no collusion, and events mentioned took place long before he came to the campaign. Few people knew the young, low-level volunteer named George, who was already proven to be a liar. Check the Dems, he says. Thomas Dupree, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush with me now. Tom, how you doing? Good morning to you. I mean, you've had 24 hours to think about it. I want to divide this segment in two parts, okay? What is the takeaway on the Manafort case as of this hour? Few people
The takeaway on the Manafort case is there is nothing in that indictment that links the president or the president's campaign to the Russians. The big question is whether Manafort is going to fight these charges or whether he is ultimately going to decide to plead and cooperate with Mueller. And if he does that, then the question is, what, if anything, does he have to say? We heard Manafort's lawyer saying in strong terms there was no collusion. So it raises the question of, even if he wanted to cooperate, what information would he have to give to Mueller?
Got it. Okay, so
to the Russians.
We're a long way from a conviction.
Whether Manafort
But
is going
what
to
would
fight
he
these charges
face given the
or whether
lineup
he
of
is
charges that
ultimately
were
gonna
announced
decide
yesterday?
To plead and
he faces
cooperate
potentially
with Mueller.
serious
And if he
jail
does
time,
that,
around
then
20
the question
years
is,
under the
what, if
federal
anything,
sentencing
does he have to
guidelines.
say?
That's
We
not
heard
to say
Manafort's
that's
lawyer
ultimately
saying
what
in
would
strong
happen
terms
if he were
there was
convicted.
no
I suspect it
collusion.
actually would be
So
a
it
lot
raises the
less than
question
that.
of, even
But
if
if
he
you're a
wanted to
defendant and you're
cooperate,
looking at
what
this long
information
line of
would he have to
charges
give to
and a
Mueller?
multi-count indictment, you're adding up the years. It's some serious time potentially.
But as you say, he could fight it. What would he face given
Yes,
the lineup
he
of
absolutely
charges
could fight it for a long time.
He
That's
faces
true.
potentially
Okay, now
serious
the
jail
other
time,
part of
around
this
20
case
years
is
under the federal
Papadopoulos.
sentencing guidelines. That's not to say
As
that's
James Rosen
ultimately
just
what would
pointed
happen
out,
if he were convicted.
can
I
he
suspect
show a
actually would be
link
lot
that the
less than
campaign was
But if
taking
you're a
his
defendant and you're looking at this long
overtures
line of charges
about
and a
meeting with the
multi-count
Russians?
indictment, you're
Because
adding
there
up
was
the years.
a lot
It's some
that came
serious
out
time,
yesterday.
potentially.
I said every
But
time
as
he
you
pushed
say,
the
he could
campaign, I
fight
said,
it.
listen, I can set this up for you. And they
Yes,
said,
he
hang on, we're not
could
going
fight it
there.
for a long time.
That's exactly
true.
right.
Okay, now
And
the
what's
other part
interesting
of
and
this
what we've
case
seen
is
so far is that it appears every time
as James
Papadopoulos
Rosen
floated
just
one of these
pointed out,
suggestions,
can he
responsible
show
people
a
within the
link that the
campaign shut him
campaign was
down
taking
and said, we're
his
just not doing that.
overtures
Now, look, it's
about
possible
meeting with
that
the
more
Russians?
information will
Because
come
there
out that
was
shows
a
at
lot
some
that
point
came
someone
out
in the
yesterday.
campaign
I said
signed
every
off
time
on
he
one of
pushed
his
the campaign, I
schemes.
said, listen, I
But
can
what
set
we've
this up
seen
for you.
so
And they
far
said,
is him
hang on,
proposing
we're not going
ideas
there.
that were
That's
decisively
exactly
rejected
right. And
by
what's
people in
interesting and
authority
what we've
within the
seen so
campaign.
far
So
is
then
that
the
it
key
appears
question is whether or
every
not the
time
damage is contained or
Papadopoulos
whether or
floated
not
one of these
there's
suggestions,
more.
responsible
I
people
think
in the
that's right.
campaign
How
shut
far
him
can you
down
go in
and said,
answering
we're just
that
not
today?
doing that. Now,
We
look,
don't
possible
know
that
a lot more
information
than
will
what
come
we've
out
seen
that
so
shows at
far
some
in the
point someone
plea
in the
agreement.
campaign
So we can't say
signed
for
off on
certain
one of
how
his
it's going to
schemes.
play out.
But
What we
we've
can
seen
say
so far
is that the
him
evidence that has gone
proposing
in the public
ideas
record
that were
that Mueller has
decisively
gathered have
rejected
yet
by
to show a
people in
link
authority
between the
within the
president
campaign.
or high-level campaign officials and the Russians.
All right, legally, what are you waiting for next, Tom?
Well, we're waiting to see, number one, whether Manafort and Gates actually fight these charges. That's a huge question, and a lot will turn on whether that proceeds to trial before a jury or whether they reach some sort of plea bargain agreement. The other question is, what's Mueller's next move? Does he have other plea agreements that he's reached and just he has yet to unveil? Is he going to indict somebody else? And the direction that Mueller takes, I think, is going to drive a lot of the events in the weeks and the months to come.
Thank you, Tom. Come on back, okay? I want to keep it nice and clear, okay? The A's, B's, and C's of all this, all right, as we move through it. Thank you, job well done. Much more on what's happening on the Mueller indictments, the potential fallout coming up later today. We'll talk to Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Also next hour, Alan Dershowitz, who has some very interesting thoughts on a lot of this. So some great guests coming up to take us through all of it as we get it.
Big lineup.
America's Newsroom, indeed. Thank you, Tom. Come on back, okay?
Fox News alert: U.S. forces capturing another terrorist involved in the 2012 Benghazi terror attack. Officials say the operation took place Sunday in Libya and was approved by President Trump. 4 Americans were killed when the U.S. consulate came under attack, including a U.S. ambassador. And now former Green Beret Michael Waltz is attributing the successful mission to a change in leadership.
Putting boots on the ground in a place like Misrata so that you can actually snatch this individual rather than a much easier operation of, say, having a Predator strike or a drone strike is incredibly complicated. And I think we've seen from President Trump, he is not afraid to take the gloves off and go in and hold these guys accountable and pull them out of there.
Still to come this hour, Ambassador John Bolton will get his take on this coming up.
9 minutes past the hour now. There is a manhunt underway in the state of Utah. University put on lockdown for hours. Police are looking for this man, warning that he is armed and dangerous. We will tell you why in a moment. Plus, there's this today.
He will fight tooth and nail to get what he believes is right for the American people relative to a tax cut and to stimulate our economy.
Will get his take on this. The White House signaling President Trump is ready to fight for tax reform. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy is coming up with a preview of what you can expect when their tax bill is finally revealed tomorrow.
Also, politics are just plain nasty. This political ad, critics say, goes way too far, showing a Republican supporter targeting minority children with his pickup truck.
President Trump is ready to fight for
This is really
tax reform.
everything that's wrong wrong with politics. This is everything that's wrong with the fear tactics of the liberal left, and they don't want to take credit for their racism, which is really what this is about.
Politics are just plain nasty. This political
is underway after a fatal carjacking near a campus of the University of Utah. The campus was on lockdown for hours after the shooting around 9 o'clock last night local time. Police say they're looking for this man, 24-year-old Austin Boutain. He should be considered armed and dangerous.
With the Congress, both sides of the Hill. And I think there's going to be a great tax cut come out of this. He will fight tooth and nail to get what he believes is right for the American people relative to a tax cut and to stimulate our economy.
That's the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly with Laura Ingraham on the debut show last night, vouching for the president. Republican lawmakers set to unveil their big tax plan tomorrow. The president tweeting this: I hope people start to focus on our massive tax cuts for business, jobs, and the middle class, in addition to Democrat corruption. A bit earlier, I talked with the House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy about all this and what's up next. Kevin McCarthy, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Give us the highlights. What's in the tax plan?
Well, we've got a lot on this tax plan. The most important thing, it's a tax cut. The most important thing for every American, we're doubling the standard deduction. And what does that mean for an individual? Instead of the first $6,000 being tax-free, it's now $12,000. A couple, that will be $24,000. Lower the corporate rate so America stays competitive. A new study shows that means $4,000 to a household. And small business, where the majority of all jobs are created, the lowest rate we've seen in more than 40 years. So what this really means is that America will be competitive, more money in your paycheck, and you could actually save more than you ever had in the past. More jobs for America. And it's fair for all across the country.
Sounds pretty conservative. Let me come back to that tax cut phrase in a moment here. 401k changes, are they in or are they out?
I think you're going to see a 401k just as when I first started investing, you get the same incentive to do it.
So no change.
And I think you're going to see, I don't think you're going to see a lot of changes there, except allowing people to put more away. The more they're able to put away, the stronger the individual becomes.
I think that could be very popular. Local and state tax deductions. Staying or going?
Well, it's going to be a fair across the country. And should somebody subsidize for another state? When you look at these high state taxes, which I come from one, California, what we do is we double the standard deduction. So that will take care of a lot. And those other states have been talking to Chairman Brady. He's been listening to him, and it's been effective. I think you'll see some adjustments in there to take care of those in the past. But remember, we're going to eliminate the AMT as well. If people look at the entire tax bill, they'll add once, they'll see that they actually get a savings in the process.
Sounds like they're staying to me.
Well, I'll tell you this. You know what's outrageous? Governor Brown happens to be the governor from California. Today is Halloween. You know the scariest thing? Tomorrow, all Californians who drive get a tax increase. And then he's going to increase our taxes on our vehicles. The last governor who did that in California became the first governor ever to get recalled. And he's complaining about what we're doing about lowering taxes.
You have 28 Republicans from California and New York.
14. We have 14.
Between the two states of New York and California, the two highest tax states. You passed a budget last week by 2 votes. How are you going to get 28 to vote in favor of that?
I think when they look at the final bill and have the input that they gave to actually deal with some of these problems, I think they're going to be excited. And when the American taxpayers across this country look at the overall bill and play it into themselves, they're going to be excited. This is going to be life-changing. That more money into the paycheck, more individuals going to work, and a fair process.
Okay, you said tax cut. Will this proposal raise taxes on anyone? Middle class, upper income, any American?
Yeah, some Americans probably will, because you know what we do, Bill? We close the loophole. And the reason why we had so many taxes were too high.
Some Americans are going to pay higher taxes. This is a Republican, hang one moment. It's a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate, a Republican in the White House. And you're saying, based on all your conservative principles over all the years you've been in Washington, you're prepared to say that some Americans will see their taxes raised.
No, what I'm saying here, listen to what I'm saying. This is a tax cut. This is lowering of the taxes. Everything you heard me tell you is we're lowering the tax rates. We're simplifying it. But we have a tax code that is burdensome, that has a lot of loopholes. When you close those loopholes, if somebody in America used those loopholes in a process to try to not pay a fair share in taxes, theirs may be a little more. But the one thing I will tell you overall, when you look at the entire tax bill, when you eliminate the AMT, when you lower the rates that individuals pay, when you lower small business on the pass-through, when you lower the corporate rate, that is a tax cut for America. Could there be one or two Americans out there that used a loophole that made it different? So be it.
We're going to see it in black and white. Right now, you're a yes vote on everything you described, correct?
I'm not just a yes vote. I'm excited for America. This is going to transform us. This is going to make us competitive around the world. This is going to build growth with the places we have not had in the past.
Let's see what it looks like and see what goes through in the end. Thank you, sir. Come back, okay?
Thank you so much.
Majority Leader there in the House. It's going to be a big deal tomorrow, obviously, if there are leaks throughout the day today. But in the end, what he describes there is that it's a net, even if your taxes are raised. But the fact they're even talking about raising taxes on anyone is something that's a long way from Ronald Reagan. So let's watch and see how this plays out.
This is going to be a big week because we're going to find out the details of that plan. All right. Well, a surprising move by convicted Army deserter Bo Bergdahl. Coming up, what happened at his sentencing hearing yesterday and why it brought him to tears.
Also, the U.S. capturing another militant involved in the Benghazi attacks of 2012, a mission President Trump signed off on. So what will happen to that terrorist now? Ambassador John Bolton live on that next.
It sends a message around the world that you can run, but you can't hide. So this president has said we're taking the gloves off.
The U.S. capturing a key militant said to be involved in the deadly Benghazi terror attack back in 2012. A U.S. official tells us that man is being brought to Washington, where he'll face federal charges. 4 Americans died during that attack, one of them the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens. Joining me now is John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and Fox News contributor. The president taking credit for this capture, Ambassador Bolton, Mustafa al-Imam, he's been captured under his orders. The president making that very clear. What do we know about this man, first of all?
Well, he was a central figure in the attack on the consulate in Benghazi, had eluded our efforts to take hold of him these many years since 2012, and so now we finally got him. I think that is a significant accomplishment. It shows several things that we don't give up when we want to get somebody responsible for committing acts of terrorism against the United States. Shows the diligence of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies. All that's to the good. What I don't understand is that having gotten him, we're bringing him to apparently to Washington to give him a full due process criminal jury trial in the United States. I'd take him to Guantanamo Bay, lock him up, throw away the key, and interrogate him for the next several years until we get every single bit of intelligence that we can.
I think a lot of people are confused by that, Ambassador Bolton. Let me share with you the statements that are coming out on this. President Trump, our memory is deep and our reach is long, and we will not rest in our efforts to find and bring back the perpetrators of these heinous attacks in Benghazi and bring them to justice. We also heard from Attorney General Jeff Sessions saying the U.S. will continue to investigate and identify all those who were involved in the attack, and we will hold them accountable for their crimes. So why is he not going to get out?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I hate to say this, but it is a continuation of the Obama administration policy of treating these terrorist attacks under the law enforcement paradigm. It's like knocking over the local drugstore. You arrest the perpetrator, try and convict him, and put him in jail after a full due process trial. That's not what happened in Benghazi. It was a terrorist act of war against the United States. We should be following the war paradigm, which for these kinds of terrorists means we get to put them in Guantanamo Bay, and we get to question them without reading them their Miranda rights, without giving them a jury trial or anything else. So I don't understand how the decision was made. I'm very surprised by it, because the argument for quite some time has been that killing these terrorists with drone strikes or other means really sacrifices raises the possibility of intensive interrogation that may lead to the apprehension of other terrorists, the prevention of future attacks in the coming years.
You heard Colonel Waltz earlier saying that this sends a strong message to the world. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson saying the U.S. should spare no effort to ensure all imam is held accountable. What message are we sending to the world, Ambassador?
I'm afraid the message is get a good criminal lawyer in Washington for your upcoming trial. I think holding these people accountable means putting them in a place where they're not going to see their friends and relatives for a long time. I think it was a mistake to try and close Guantanamo Bay during the Obama administration. I thought we'd see a change. As I say, you can talk about bringing these people to justice, but it's not the same as a criminal justice kind of prosecution. These people were committing acts of war against the United States, and that's the way we should approach handling them.
You've heard this name a lot over the past 24 hours. George Papadopoulos now cooperating with authorities. Ambassador Bolton, after being caught lying to FBI agents over the timing of his contacts with a London professor with Russian connections who claimed they had dirt on Hillary Clinton. That professor has since told The Telegraph he has a clear conscience. You have something to say on this.
Well, I'd just like to underline what James Rosen said earlier this morning.
You've heard this name a lot over the past
story that
24
Papadopoulos told the FBI in its important aspects, did the professor say he had dirt on Hillary Clinton? Did he offer to introduce him to Vladimir Putin's niece, to take him to meet the Russian ambassador, and so on and so forth? This professor Mifsud flatly denies. So we have to ask the question, didn't the FBI interview Mifsud? Did they do nothing to try and corroborate what Papadopoulos said? It's hard to believe they didn't, but if this unravels for the FBI, I think that would be significant. I think people need to dig into this further.
Lastly, because it's so important, the president is about to embark on this Asian trip. He's leaving November 5th, Sunday. He will start off in Japan. This is a big moment for this president, Ambassador Bolton. He will be making stops, meeting with the leader of the Republic of Korea as well as China. North Korea obviously is going to be a big topic.
Well, it's a hugely important trip for the president, and in the first three stops, as you say, Japan, South Korea, and China, I think the North Korean nuclear weapons program will be at the top of the agenda. The president's very clear, going back to his speech at the UN last month, that denuclearization was the only way forward. Sure, he'll make those points. We need to see how the people he'll be meeting with respond, and really how he deals with China on a whole broad range of issues.
All right, Ambassador Bolton, great of you to come on this morning. Good to see you.
Glad to do it.
29 past the hour now, and there's this, the big three of social media. That's Facebook, Google, and Twitter, all facing lawmakers this morning on Capitol Hill. What the companies will say about those fake Russian ads online, and when will we see them? We are waiting. Plus, Hillary Clinton now speaking out for the first time about the indictments from Bob Mueller. What she's saying as Governor Mike Huckabee reacts to that. Next.
I'm not worried about it distracting because it doesn't have anything to do with us, because this is something that is action that took place outside of the campaign or campaign activity.
Social media giants headed on the Hill today. Watch out for Facebook, Twitter, and Google, all testifying before a series of congressional panels. They'll talk about tell lawmakers about content created by Russian operatives during the election of last year, how it reached far more American users than previously disclosed. So developments from that hearing as we wait to see our first example of this ad. Stay tuned. America's Newsroom is all over it when it gets rolling here.
Meanwhile, new reaction coming in from Hillary Clinton to indictments by special counsel Robert Mueller against former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his longtime associate Rick Gates. Clinton saying, quote, "We know everything we need to know. We just have to make sure that members of Congress do their jobs and hold the president accountable." Joining me now is Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas and Fox News contributor. I guess a lot of people are left wondering, hold him accountable for what?
Well, that's the whole point. And I find it incredibly comical that Hillary is saying, we know everything we need to know. You know, that's got to be the funniest statement Hillary's ever made, because what we really need to know is, why did her campaign give millions of dollars to the Perkins Cole law firm? Why did the DNC have such a connection through Tony Podesta to this faked up story about the Russian dossier? There's a whole lot we don't know, and for Hillary to say, okay, game's off, that's all we need to know. I mean, come on, that's absurd. And what we really need to know, what we found out yesterday was that Donald Trump was not connected to anything that Paul Manafort or Rick Gates or George Papadopoulos were charged with. No connection.
And while
that's what we've learned so far.
And while Hillary Clinton says we know everything we need to know, your daughter, Sarah Sanders, at the White House yesterday saying the indictments have nothing to do with the president, and the real collusion comes from the Clintons.
What we found out yesterday was that Donald Trump was not connected. Well, if we want to start going guilt by association by what people did before they got in the White House, let's take a look at Hillary and Bill Clinton. Let's look at people like Herbie Branscombe and Jim Guy Tucker and Webb Hubbell, who was in the White House before he went to jail. I mean, there's a rogues gallery there. If you want to look at the people who got indicted, who were tried, some went to prison, and they can argue, well, that happened before. In some cases, it did not happen before they got to the White House. But the point is, if Mueller is going to do a thorough investigation of Russia, he's got to investigate why there was this incredible connection between the DNC and Hillary's campaign and the fake Russian dossier. What he's shown so far has no connection to the president, to the White House, or to White House staff.
And what we know so far is that Manafort and Gates have pled not guilty to these charges in this Mueller probe. So we're left wondering what happens next. Let's talk Paul Manafort. Does he fight these charges?
Between the DNC and Hillary's campaign. Well, it looks like he probably will. I read the indictment. I mean, it's shown so far. If it's true, then his issue is one that deals with tax evasion, not registering as a foreign lobbyist, and those are serious things, and he'll have to answer for it. If he's not guilty, then he can prove that he's not guilty. Although actually the burden of proof, the prosecutors have to prove that he is guilty. But those are serious things. But, Sarah was right. This has nothing to do with his work on the Trump campaign. It all preceded it by a long period of time, and it was not relevant to it.
What do you wish? How do you wish the president would respond to all of this? Some in the early stages of this were urging the president, don't respond, don't tweet, let this lie. What would you like to see from the White House?
This has nothing to do with his telling the president not to tweet is kind of like telling Colin Kaepernick not to take a knee. I think he's going to do it. But frankly, if he were asking me, I would tell him ignore this stuff because he shouldn't worry himself with it. It's not touching him. And if this is all they've got, then he needs to go about getting this tax plan done, put people back to work. Have a great trip to Asia, which I think he will do. He's got a lot to crow about in terms of accomplishments, jobs, the GDP growth. There's a lot to celebrate in this White House, and that's what he should do.
Perhaps he's taking some of that advice, Governor Huckabee, because one of his latest tweets just an hour ago, the president saying, I hope people will start to focus on our massive tax cuts for business, jobs, and the middle class, in addition to Democrat corruption. So he is trying at least to put the focus back on that as we are awaiting the details of this tax plan to be released.
Perhaps he's White House. And that's the focus the president needs to give, because Americans need the tax plan. And it's not just tax reduction, it's a reform. And the reason that America needs it is because it brings significant capital, billions of capital, back to the U.S., which means Americans get to go to work and earn paychecks for their family. We make things again. We start exploding in our gross domestic product. Everything happens in a positive way, including people's retirement funds, their paychecks. It's a reform. That's where we need to be, is growing the economy. And we've been seeing it shrink for a long time. This president focused on it, I think, could make a huge difference for the future of this nation.
We've got to leave it there, Governor Huckabee. Judge Napolitano was on with us in the minutes following this indictment being released, and he said this is the first of many dominoes to fall. What do you think is next with this Mueller probe?
Retirement funds, their paychecks. Well, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be indicted. So that's what my one prediction that I give you with some level of real confidence.
Something we can plan on. All right, Governor Huckabee, thank you for being here.
There you go.
Always good to see you.
Thanks. Headline if you were, huh? It is do or die tonight. Later tonight in Los Angeles. Game 6 World Series. Dodgers and Astros are back on the West Coast. Houston leads it 3-2. A monster 13-12 extra innings victory. history in Game 5. Astros, for their part, they can make history. It's the closest they've ever been to winning a World Series in their 50-plus year history. First pitch, 8:20 Eastern Time. Tonight, you can see it on Fox.
I'm feeling a win for the Astros here. I mean, apparently I'm a new Astros fan because we took on this friendly bet here. And so anyway, it's looking pretty good for me.
Signed in stone. But you got Verlander on the mound tonight, as we talked about yesterday.
Very exciting.
I mean, he's like the ace in the hole there. So, like a chance, but the Dodgers they're tough.
I like my chances right now.
Maybe we'll get a Game 7.
See it on Fox. Meanwhile, the attack ads in a high-stakes race for Virginia governors is being described as, quote, disgusting. This ad showing a Republican targeting minority children in a pickup truck. Our panel takes it up.
Also, Sandra, a harrowing story of survival may not be what it looks like. Two women rescued at sea, claiming they were adrift for months, and something might be fishy here.
In the story of two women stranded at sea. Officials say the women had an emergency beacon on board their sailboat that was never activated when they were found last week. The device sends distress signals and locations to authorities and is activated when it's either submerged in water or turned on manually. The women say strong storms led to a broken engine at the beginning of their roughly 5-month journey. In the story of two women
You were throwing us some flags on this one.
Something didn't sound right from the beginning, and it'll be interesting to see where that story goes.
Like, why don't you like the beacon if you're stressed? And apparently they said that what?
Something tells me we'll learn more.
We shall. Lawsuits. It's Corey Lewandowski now. Have a listen.
The American people are smart, and they know that this is a tactic which does not work, which is fear and scare tactics, because the American people, they want change, they want to have a safe environment for their children, and, you know, perpetuating these fears which don't exist, the American people see right through this.
So Corey Lewandowski been earlier talking about this negative attack ad against Republican Ed Gillespie. Gillespie is running for governor of Virginia against the Democrat Ralph Northam. Here is part of the ad that shows minority children being pursued by a man in a pickup truck.
They want change. They want to have a safe environment for their children, and, you know, perpetuating these fears which don't exist. The American people see right through this.
So Corey Lewandowski been earlier talking about this negative attack ad against Republican Ed Gillespie. Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, Fox News contributor Adrian Elrod, former Democrat director of strategic communications for the Democrat Hillary Clinton. Good day to both of you. The ad ends in a nightmare, and the child is in bed, comforted by his parents. Rich, you saw it, and you thought what?
It's reprehensible. It's disgusting. It should be taken down. Everyone associated with it should apologize to Ed Gillespie. Ed Gillespie is a public-spirited guy. He denounced the Charlottesville riots immediately. He is in no way a racist or has any animosity to people of color. So this is just absurd, disgusting, and I just don't have words for it.
Adrian, have they taken the ad down, or is it still out?
No, they haven't taken the ad down, and it's still up, and it's going to keep running until the no. I don't think they should at all.
Really?
What is disgusting? No, because what is disgusting here is that the reality is that millions of immigrant families in America and thousands in Virginia are dealing with Donald Trump's America every single day. The harsh reality of wondering whether or not they're going to be deported, whether or not they are going to be taken into any sort of
chain-link fence by a white man driving a pickup truck.
Yeah, that is the reality.
Everybody wakes up with feeling that every day.
Look, it's hard. It is a hard ad to watch, but it is the reality that many
How about the clips, Adrian, at the end of that ad that show the Charlottesville marchers with the white supremacists? Think that was fair game?
Yeah, I do think it was fair game because, number one, these protests are still continuing in Virginia. Number two, while Ed Gillespie may have come out, I agree, he did come out and say, I denounced the white supremacist movement. Of course he did. But look, number one, he is supported by Donald Trump. He has supported many of Donald Trump's policies. Donald Trump has not exactly been anti-white supremacist. He's come out You know, he said both sides are have good people on both sides.
You had local police, you had the sheriff's department, you had the National Guard in Charlottesville that day, and they did nothing to keep these two groups apart. And that's why the physical confrontation happened. It is a sad chapter in American history, but things were in place to prevent them. And the local authorities and the mayor and the governor did nothing to prevent a physical confrontation.
Look, no, Governor McCullough.
You could argue they allowed it to happen.
No, I will certainly not say that Governor McCullough allowed that to happen at all. Look, there was certainly fault with the local law enforcement, but what we're dealing with here is the reality that many immigrant families are facing in America today. These children are having nightmares.
Let me go back to Rich on this. So, Rich, she's making the case that Ed Gillespie is trying to round people up. Gillespie was on the air a bit earlier today and responded to this.
I will certainly not say that Governor McCullough
in Virginia, we respect civil discourse. And this is a new low in politics here. It's a sad day. Outrageously, my opponent has embraced it. And it reveals a disdain not just for my supporters, but for all Virginians.
You know, I saw it and I thought, wow, what are the polls showing there, Rich?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gillespie is close. And if you're actually to pull this thing off, it would be extraordinary, because the party that controls the White House in this off-year gubernatorial election in Virginia always loses. So that Gillespie is at least in the margin of error is an extraordinary thing. It speaks to how sure-footed he is as a campaigner. And the idea that he is some sort of racist is just disgusting. And this is not an anti-immigration enforcement ad. This isn't about ICE officers. This is about a white racist, presumably supporter of Ed Gillespie, hunting down minority children in the street. And anyone who can justify that can justify anything.
But Adrian just said she was okay with it.
How sure-footed he is. I have no words for it. I can't believe it's a McCarthyite argument built upon smear to think that Ed Gillespie in any way supports anything like is depicted in this ad. And I think any fair-minded person who actually cares about civility in this country and our political debate should at least be willing to say that.
Brought to you by the Latino Victory Fund. By the way, Marco Rubio campaigns there today for Gillespie. Adrian, I'll give you the last word on all of that.
Well, look, I'm also going to say that it's disgusting that Ed Gillespie has essentially blamed Ralph Northam for MS-13 violence because he cast a deciding vote to support sanctuary cities in Virginia, which, by the way, there are no sanctuary cities in Virginia. So again, this is heavily mudslinging.
Why would he cast a deciding vote against a ban on sanctuary cities?
Well, because he supports sanctuary cities.
Right, exactly. And sanctuary cities make it easier for illegal criminals to stay in this country. We've had instances of that over and over again in this country.
I wish we had more time to continue that part of the discussion. I apologize, we're out of time, but plenty to talk about soon. Rich, thanks. Adrian, thanks to you as well.
Thanks,
about 10 minutes now before
It could become the new battleground for ISIS. In moments, we will tell you what the U.S. is now doing to help fight terrorists in Africa after the deaths of 4 American soldiers in Niger.
Also, Special Counsel Bob Mueller pulling the charges, first time against former campaign manager Paul Manafort. Does Mueller have a bigger target in mind? Alan Dershowitz is here in moments with his insights on this case based on what we think we know right now. Coming up.
I don't think they're going to get him. I don't think they have anything, because collusion, even if it were to be established, isn't a crime. You have to find something that actually violates the federal criminal statute. I don't think they're even close to that.
Fight against terrorists in West Africa, less than a month after the deaths of 4 American soldiers in Niger. Lucas Tomlinson is live for us from the Pentagon. Lucas, is this a sign of more U.S. involvement in West Africa?
Sandra, while the State Department pledged millions more in counterterrorism funds, at the United Nations, Ambassador Nikki Haley rejected calls to add more troops in West Africa.
We have reservations about encumbering a large peacekeeping mission with tasks it would not traditionally perform. It continues to suffer from a lack of enabling equipment, and it expends most of its resources protecting and resupplying itself.
The UN Security Council met to discuss the rising terrorist threat in West Africa following the deaths of 4 American soldiers. Yesterday, a top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee warned against mission creep.
Large peacekeeping mission.
I do not think the American people want the United States conducting a global, endless shadow war under the radar, covert, and beyond scrutiny.
protecting
Defense
and
Secretary Jim
resupplying
Mattis
itself.
and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson appeared before that committee. Sandra?
Lucas, did we learn anything new about the Niger ambush?
Yesterday, a top Democrat. Well, Sandra, we didn't learn anything new about the ambush, but Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis pushed back on any notion that a new war authorization is needed, as some in Congress have requested.
Under the radar.
What we've seen is these groups come apart, go back together. They change their names as often as a rock and roll band. They're keenly aware that they've got certain legal strictures on our side that they can take advantage of. We call it lawfare, where they actually use our laws against us.
The U.S. military is still using the same 16-year-old war authorization to conduct attacks against terrorists following the 9/11 attacks. Sandra?
Lucas Tomlinson from the Pentagon, thank you.
Watch this story, too, now from the Hill today. The big social media giant set to open up just how big a role Russia played in spreading any type of fake news, trying to swing voters in their before the presidential election. Details ahead on what we might hear on the Hill. Also, Bob Mueller firing off his first indictments as the president reacts this morning. That's coming up.
There's clear evidence of the Clinton campaign colluding with Russian intelligence to spread disinformation and smear the president to influence the election. We've been saying from day one there's been no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, and nothing in the indictment today changes that at all.